The sun baked the field into a hard, unyielding crust. Mark drove the shovel deep, putting his full weight behind the handle. Then, the blade hit something that was not rock. A sharp, resonant clang echoed through the heat, vibrating up the shaft and into his palms. He dropped to his knees, clawing at the dirt with his bare hands. A corner of something dark and polished emerged from the clay. He stood up, wiped the grit from his forehead, and let out a sharp shout toward the barn. David heard it, dropped his pitchfork, and sprinted across the uneven ground. They met at the hole, breathing hard. They sank their fingers into the loose soil, digging around the edges until the object was free. Together, they heaved it upward. It was heavy, dead weight that pulled at their shoulders. They dropped it onto the grass with a dull thud. The surface felt freezing to the touch, a stark contrast to the stifling midday heat. They stood back, chests heaving, staring at the polished lid. It was not just a box. It was a secret, long buried and finally pulled into the light.
Mark pulled a pocket knife from his pocket and jammed the blade into the iron seam. He twisted.
The metal did not budge. The hinge remained locked, cold and indifferent to his effort.
He handed the knife to David, who pressed and pried until the handle bent against his palm. Still, nothing.
Frustration mounted as the sun climbed higher, turning the field into a furnace. They fanned out, scouring every square yard of the perimeter. David overturned heavy rocks, his movements jagged and hurried. Mark scrambled up the rough bark of the old oak tree, scanning the branches for a hidden key or a dropped tool.
He found only dust and dead leaves. They returned to the chest,
their hands now mapped with red, raw blisters. The skin on their palms burned with every touch of the iron.
They tried a different angle, wedging stones beneath the lid to gain leverage, but the clasp held firm.
Sweat poured into their eyes, stinging and blurring their vision. By mid-afternoon, the chest felt less like a container and more like a taunting, heavy anvil. They collapsed into the dirt,
chests heaving, the silence of the field pressing down on them as the metal remained sealed shut.
They sat in the dirt, backs against the cooling earth, passing a canteen between them. The water was lukewarm, but it washed the dust from their throats. Mark stared at the chest, his breathing slowing. He reached out, his fingers trembling slightly from the strain,
and began to trace the intricate grooves of the iron clasp. He moved slowly, methodically,
feeling for any irregularity in the metal. His thumb caught on a tiny, recessed line near the base of the hinge. He paused. He wiped away a layer of dried mud with his sleeve and leaned closer. There, hidden in the shadow of the metalwork, was a small, square notch. It was perfectly flush with the surface. He looked at David. David saw the shift in his gaze and leaned in, his face inches from the box. The heat of the day seemed to vanish, replaced by a sudden, sharp focus. Mark pointed to the spot. David shifted his weight, bracing his knees into the soil.
They hovered their hands over the chest, fingers extended. The air felt thin and static.
They looked at each other, nodded once, and reached out to press the mechanism together. Their thumbs met the cold metal of the notch at the exact same moment. They applied pressure. A sharp, rhythmic click echoed across the field, cutting through the silence like a gunshot. The internal mechanism groaned, a sound of rusted iron grinding against iron. Mark pulled upward, and the heavy lid resisted for a heartbeat before snapping back on its hinges. It swung open, hitting the grass with a dull thud. The interior was not empty. Sunlight flooded the cavity, striking a bed of gold coins that seemed to ignite against the dark, damp earth. The coins were stacked in irregular columns, their edges worn smooth by time. Nestled among the gold were clusters of vibrant gems, deep blues, burning reds, and emerald greens that caught the light and threw sparks across the faces of the two men. They did not speak. Mark leaned forward, his hands hovering over the hoard, watching the way the sunlight danced off the polished metal. Beside the gold, a weathered, folded map sat tucked into the corner. its parchment edges curled and brittle. David reached out, his calloused fingers brushing the surface of a sapphire. The weight of their long day vanished, replaced by the sheer, blinding reality of what lay before them. Mark carefully lifted the map from the chest, his fingers avoiding the brittle edges. He unfolded it flat across the grass, revealing ink lines that charted a path beyond their property. David moved closer, his finger tracing the route as he nodded in silence. They did not linger over the hoard. Mark grabbed a canvas bag, and they began to move the gold coins and gems into two distinct, equal piles. The clinking of metal against metal replaced the silence of the field. Once the piles were secured, they stood up and stretched their stiff limbs. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long, orange shadows across the field. They gathered their bags, the weight pulling at their shoulders, and turned toward the house. Mark held the map in his free hand, his eyes scanning the horizon ahead. The discovery had changed the landscape of their lives. They walked slowly, leaving the empty hole behind, their focus shifting from the earth beneath their feet to the unknown trail marked on the parchment. The day ended, but the path forward had only just begun.